Premiers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce Christine Van Geyn, who defended Canadian liberty by crushing the Liberal government's unjustified invocation of the Draconian Emergencies Act. You know, I know this audience strongly opposed the flagrant peacetime assault on our rights and freedoms, unprecedented except for the War Measures Act during the FL crisis 52 years ago, which, by the way, I also opposed, and all of you would have too, had you been around back in the day. Unfortunately, we were a distinct minority then and now. We were battling against government, mainstream media, academia, and sadly, many self-proclaimed civil libertarians. This was the same hallelujah chorus that supported brutal closures during the COVID pandemic. You know, it is alarming and distressing how much loss of freedom people will tolerate when an authoritarian government scares them with superficially plausible misinformation. Thomas Jefferson said that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And I should add, people willing to stand up to oppression and take on compliant conventional wisdom. We knew the act was not needed. It wasn't asked for by any police force, even though the minister responsible lied to Parliament about that and was not forced to resign. Furthermore, the Freedom Convoy never remotely constituted a threat to democracy. Rather, it was an expression of it. Let's face it, one reason jeopardizing the rights of 40 million Canadians didn't attract widespread opposition was that the blue-collar protesters were looked down on with disdain. And that kind of snobbery is not only contemptible, it is dangerous. The purpose of civil liberties is to protect everyone's rights, not just those who are popular with progressives in the annex or members of the Laurentian elite and their fellow travelers. Christine Van Geyn's unprecedented victory will hopefully deter future governments who may be tempted to assault Canadian rights and freedoms. Christine is the litigation director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in the courts and public opinion. She's also host of the national television show Canadian Justice. She co-authored a book, Pandemic Panic: How Canadian Government Responded to COVID-19 and Changed Civil Liberties Forever. That was shortlisted for the Donner Prize, and I think it will help people remember the strange, illogical, and abusive actions of the government, and I recommend its purchase. Her signal achievement was, with her team, winning a case in the federal court which found invocation of the Emergencies Act to be unreasonable and several measures to be unconstitutional, including the seizure of bank accounts. It constituted a complete refutation and humiliation of the Trudeau government and a victory for freedom. For that and her other great work, Christine is a highly worthy recipient of the Freedom Award. Scott Hughes will make the presentation. Christine, bravo and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. What can I do?
Well, are you going to speak?
Well, yeah, I can.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Catherine, can you take it?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much, Joe. I actually campaigned for Joe Oliver back when I was in law school, so it's a real trip to be here now, receiving an award like this for some of the legal work that I got to do. And it's so great to be here at this important event. And thank you, Catherine Swift and Jocelyn Bamford, for all the work that you do with the coalition. Catherine, I've admired your work for a really long time, back for when you were with CFIB, and you might say I was the original Swiftie. I'm sure you've never heard that before. And Jocelyn, the work that you have done advocating for small and medium-sized businesses through the coalition, in addition to the work you actually do building and growing an exceptional Canadian and international business, is really inspiring. So thank you so much for the honor of the Freedom Award this year. And it really has been a strange year. It's actually been a strange 4 years. I was approached in 2019 while I was on maternity leave from my job at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And I was asked to come to the Canadian Constitution Foundation to become the litigation director. This is the leading civil liberties charity in Canada. I had no idea when I accepted the job in 2019 that the country and the world was about to be faced with what I think is probably the biggest civil liberties crisis in a generation. And I started at the CCF about 2 months into the pandemic in 2020. Over the next few years, we held the government to account as politicians repeatedly stepped over the line in the name of public health. While some of the things, at the beginning, you could justify them, some when we didn't know the science, when things were evolving in the very early days, I understand the need for the government to have flexibility. But as the months wore on, and the rationality and indeed science seemed to take a backseat to ideology, we knew that we needed to step in and take action. We saw churches, including when they held drive-in services, shut down while big box stores were open. We saw the province of Quebec impose curfews, suggest warrantless searches of private homes to make sure gathering limits were being enforced. They proposed a tax on the unvaccinated, and the unvaccinated were fired en masse. We at the CCF represented a teenage girl who had been vaccinated, then had an adverse reaction, and she was called an anti-vaxxer. She had gone to get vaccinated. We saw the federal government order Canadians into quarantine hotels at a cost of $2,000 a person, only to then catch COVID in the hotel's crowded lobbies. And of course, we saw the Trudeau government invoke the hammer of the Emergencies Act, that extraordinary law that had never been used before, that allows Cabinet to make new criminal law by executive order. And they did. That's exactly what they did. They used this power to freeze bank accounts, prohibit gatherings, and shut down speech. And the reason, as we all know, was a noisy convoy of protesters in front of Parliament Hill. Let me be clear. Canadians have a right to protest, including protest the things their government is doing. And this is a unique and special thing in the world. Most people in this world cannot protest their government, and if they try, they could be arrested, and even their families could be arrested and punished. The right to protest and oppose our government is a very precious and unique thing that we need to protect. Now, at the same time, police can shut down protests when they're out of control. And while the police in Ottawa said that the convoy was in fact noteworthy for its absence of violence, the protest was blockading roads, and police did have authority to remove the protesters. But what the government could not do was invoke that legislation, the Emergencies Act, with a high legal threshold which hadn't been met. The Trudeau government broke the law when they invoked the Emergencies Act, when they froze those bank accounts and restricted gatherings. And they violated our most fundamental rights that are guaranteed in our Constitution. And you don't need to take my word for it. You can take the word of Justice Mosley at the federal court, who made those findings in the legal challenge that we brought. Now, the fight isn't over. We're headed to the Federal Court of Appeal. The Trudeau government announced that they were appealing the decision, a 200-page decision, 14 minutes after they had received that decision. So I guess they're quite quick readers over there in the Justice Department. Or maybe the loss was just that total. But if you're interested in supporting our appeal, you can make a tax-deductible charitable donation to help fund our legal fees at the ccf.ca. Now, I just want to finish by saying I sometimes think that I have some type of personality disorder, because aside from my family and a few close friends, I just really do not care what people think about me. And I'm lucky, because that's actually a really good trait to have when you do this kind of work. And that was especially true during the pandemic, where I was one of the few voices going against the narrative, saying the unsayable, that the government was going too far, and that our rights matter, and that our Constitution matters. So it's always sort of delightful and surprising to find out that some people actually like me after all, and they appreciate the work that I do and that we do at the CCF, and that they believe that what we're doing is changing things and for the better. So thank you so much, and keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate you all so much.